let's talk about reasonable accommodation for just a moment. But one of the things that I want to really, in the little bit of time we have, is focus on Palmer versus Circuit Court of Cook County. I talked about the Palmer case earlier. Just because the law permits an employer to do a fitness for duty evaluation is not always an adequate basis for deciding to do one. Sometimes they're better off just firing the employee. Let the employee raise the issue of mental health as their defense. And then they can do an evaluation to determine whether or not there's independent evidence to support that. In the case of Palmer, this is a case where the Federal Appeals Court in the Seventh Circuit declined to reinstate a mentally ill worker who repeatedly threatened to kill her supervisor. In her ADA lawsuit, the court held that a, quote, a personality conflict with a supervisor or coworker does not establish a disability within the meaning of the disability law. Now, I don't know that that would be true today under ADA, but it doesn't matter, let's go on. Even if it produces anxiety and depression, as such conflicts often do. Such a conflict is not disabling. At most, it requires the worker to get a new job. But if a personality conflict triggers a serious mental illness that in turn is disabling, the fact that the trigger was not itself a disabling illness is no defense. But the judgment of the district court must still be affirmed. And this is why I don't think it matters whether it, even though this was pre-ADA AA, I don't think that the ADA AA changes the conclusion of this, would change the conclusion of this court, because they go on to say, there is no evidence that Palmer was fired because of her mental illness. She was fired because she threatened to kill another employee. But if an employer fires an employee because of the employee's unacceptable behavior, the fact that the behavior was precipitated by a mental illness does not present an issue under the ADA. The Act does not require an employer to retain a potentially violent employee. Such a requirement would place the employer on a razor's edge, in jeopardy of violating the Act if it fired such an employee, yet in jeopardy of being deemed negligent if it retained him and he hurt someone. The Act protects only qualified employees, that is, employees qualified to do the job for which they were hired, and threatening other employees disqualifies one. It is true that an employer has a statutory duty to make a reasonable accommodation to an employee's disability. That is, an adjustment in working conditions to enable the employee to overcome his disability if the employer can do this without undue hardship. But we cannot believe that this duty runs in favor of employees who commit or threaten to commit violent acts. The retention of such an employee would cause justifiable anxiety to coworkers and supervisors. It would be unreasonable to demand of the employer either that it force its employees to put up with this, or that it station guards to prevent the mentally disturbed employee from getting out of hand. So clear is this that we do not think a remand is necessary to explore the possibilities of accommodation. Now, I love this case, and it's cited by a lot of different courts in a variety of circuits, including the Ninth. So when I have an employer call me saying, you know, we've had this employee who made this threat to kill her supervisor, would like a fitness for duty evaluation, I say, why? And one of the ways I helped drive that point home is I said, let me ask you this. What if I did the fitness for duty evaluation, and much to your surprise and consternation, I find him fit for duty? You putting him back to work? Hell no. No, you're not, are you? No. Then let's skip the fitness for duty evaluation. Let's go directly to fired. Now, since fired employees are sometimes more at risk for violence and you have less control, we absolutely want to get together and talk about how we can mitigate. And there are a number of ways to do that. Jim spends a lot of time on this and trying to help employers reduce the risk of violence. And it may involve, at some point, an assessment. But most of these assessments can be done indirectly by gathering information about the risk factors, the known risk factors, and balancing them against the known protective factors. In the context of those known risk and protective factors, offering advice that enhance the protective and reduce the risk. So it needn't necessarily involve a fitness for duty evaluation. Even where you do a fitness for duty evaluation, I've done them in these kinds of contexts, only in the context of this. Joe, you know we're having this, this is from the Human Resources now. Human Resources saying, Joe, you know that we're having this conversation because you threatened to kill Billy Bob, your supervisor, right? Yeah. I didn't mean that. Well, I understand. That's your position. We're clear about that. Even though I know there's a lot of people who would like to kill Billy Bob. Yeah, I understand. So here's the deal. We have a zero tolerance policy around workplace violence, and you violated that, and 0 is 0, and we're not going to be able to bring you back. So the discussion we're going to have with you now is whether you're going to have a hard landing or a soft landing. We'd like it to be a soft landing, Joe. You've worked here for a good while. You've been an employee for us for a long time. We'd like for it to be a soft landing, but here's what that's going to require. We're going to give you a 9-month severance, and we're going to include a continuation of health care, including mental health care. But you're going to stipulate that you're not going to sue the company, and you're going to accept this, blah, blah, blah. But you're also going to have to agree to mental health counseling twice a week for that 9-month period. Now, will you agree to that? I don't know. And we need to decide what kind of health care that's going to be, so we're going to ask you to sit for an evaluation where we're going to do that. That kind of thing can happen. The employee can say no to it, but they generally don't because they want the soft landing. So when your agency is trying to figure out how to mitigate risk, it's often best to do that in the context of some negotiation of that type. What I often tell them is, the best that I'm going to tell you is that this person is at low risk of killing you. It's a low probability they'll kill you. Is that going to be satisfactory to you? No, man, I'm looking for 0. Can you give me a 0 in there? No, I'm not going to give you a 0. Okay, so what we want to talk about then is risk management. I think that the misnomer of our field is that we spend way too much time engaged in risk prediction or risk assessment and not enough time in risk management or risk control. And so by understanding the specific risk factors and the present and absent protective factors, we're in a better position to do that.